Okay, so thank you, Igor and Katya, for inviting me. I'm very excited to be in Minsk, and the weather remind me the Minnesota and Boston, and also tell me that pretty soon I will take my grandchildren to ski. So it's this. I'm very glad to present this paper. This is a joint work with Mike Keane, who just moved from Oxford back to Australia, and Osnat Lifshitz. She's with me at IDC, and the paper is about career and family decisions, and we follow the cohorts of 1935 to 1975. And I think the best is if you have comments and questions, leave them toward the end, so we can. I will keep my track on time to give you time to ask questions. What is the outline? What is the question? Basically, what we introduce into labor economics is how marriage and divorce affected wages, employment of white U.S. males and females, and we look at the people who were born from 1930 to the 1970. We basically take a lifetime decision. So we take what we call structural model of 5 cohorts in a unified econometric applied work using those who don't know, CPS data is basically repeated cross-section data. So we are following the cohort using the repeated cross-section data, and you will see the cohort, the data, we start with aggregate data, then we go by cohort and by marriage decisions, and we show you how important is this marriage and divorce decisions on understanding labor supply, etc. It's a household model. Decisions, in terms of the models that we are taking of a lifetime meaning from age 17 to 65, it's a very extensive model relative to what has been done before, because we are looking at both endogenously on education decisions from age 17, on marriage decisions, divorce and marriage, employment decisions of individuals, whether they are married or unmarried, and their fertility decisions. And so these are the key lifetime decisions of all of us. And we try to put it in a unified framework and tell you what happened to the, this is most of the US citizens are what we call white. Basically, we exclude what is called black and Hispanics. Now, what is driving their decisions? What are the key sources of driving the decisions in our model are basically the changes that almost research in the past has identified are important, but we put them all together. Usually, most papers take each one separately. The key one is the parents' education. Actually, the most important person in your life is your parents. And the most important characteristics of the parents are their education and their knowledge. And we know it from a lot of research on that. And actually, the most important person in your parents is your mother. And we start with how the mother affects your decisions on education, marriage, employment, and fertility. Then, the second very important decision in your life, and you can ask some people who are in this stage, I won't mention names, is marriage. And marriage opportunities changes over time, because an important aspect of your married match is the education level of this person and his unobserved characteristics, skills, because the opportunities of your partner in the labor market affect your income and your family income and your lifetime decisions. The second important into marriage is how costly it is to divorce. Because if it's a Catholic marriage that you cannot divorce, it's different. If it's a divorce where you can go back, then your lifetime decision change, both on marriage and your education. So we take those as a forcing variable, changing over time to different cohorts in the US. The next one, as you know, is very important, is what the hell you are going to earn, are the wages. And the wages opportunities change over cohort quite significantly. Skill bias technical change. The return to education has changed dramatically. And last and not least, is the fertility control. The ability to control contraception, as Goldin and Katz and others point out, is an important part of your decisions on marriage, education, da, 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 da. So we take all of them and we are going to measure how we can fit the main observations. Do we need all these exogenous changes to fit this observation? And I can tell you already, yes. How it affects the parameters, so the parameters that has some economic values, like for example, how changes in the parameters of the return to education has changed over cohorts. And we want to answer the main question, how marriage and divorce affected wages and employment of white US, blah, 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 blah. So that's basically the outline of the paper. And the end, we are going to do some counterfactual. When you do structural models, you better do some policy counterfactual. And the one that we do is the US is actually have what we call joint taxation. So basically a lot of the second earner, whether it's a woman, usually it's the female, start from the marginal tax rate of the husband. And moving to an individual taxation, meaning that she would start from zero. And we would like to see how that affect all this decision, and you will see it affect quite substantially. And what I mean quite substantially, I can give you a number. It's basically would increase married female employment by 9%. So let's start with the data. And the data is basically a motivation, and I will do it fairly quickly. So each picture, so the data is what? Taking what we call CPS data. So those who don't know, CPS is basically repeated cross-section, several thousand, 10,000s of observation on each cohort, starting in 62, going all the way to 2016. It takes time to publish. What can we do? Now the data I'm going to show you is from age 22 to 65, although we are going to estimate things from age 17. And we are talking about Caucasian, basically white. I think this is the picture everyone should start his labor class. Because the picture tells you on the left-hand side the female employment. So what you have here is the percentage of female employed by their marriage status, starting in 62 all the way to 2016, and what, 15 maybe, I'm sorry. And what you see here, which is the most striking, is that the employment rate of single and divorce, so single are the green, divorce are the red, and if you don't see basically what you see, it's exactly the same, and it stays constant around 80%. So when we talk about the revolution that female are working more, it's only married female. Second, so that's the key other part. Over that time, what we see is that there is a huge decrease of marriage. Marriage went down from almost 80% to 63%, okay? And basically, of course, the equivalent increase in the non-married. When you look at and another thing which is important, that even today, when we look like as if things are converged among the female, those are above, the single and divorced are above the married female. With the male, it's the opposite. There is a slight decrease, mainly only for fact that more men going to study, not because they are not working as much, and that the single men are below the married men. And it continued, and the trend is the same. And again, it doesn't matter if you are divorced or single. Single are younger than divorced. They behave in the labor market very much the same. So that's, I think, a key picture to take, and we want to jointly explain this picture. But you have to remember, this is aggregate data. And each aggregate point here is a combination of different cohorts. And the key difference, what exists, is by cohorts, and I will come that. This picture, I put only, it's a macro picture. It's about unemployment. Unemployment defined differently what it is in the aggregate data. But if you look at the right-hand side, you see something which is not have been mentioned to my knowledge before. Unemployment of single and divorced is twice as high on average than of that of married men. Not only that it's twice as large, it's more fluctuating. And look at the last recession, how big it is. Most of the unemployment. So basically, non-married and married men and female have different quality. And don't take it personal. So don't be... The next point I want to say is about what makes married female to work more. That's the key phenomena that we have seen in the first slides. And what you see on the left-hand side is on this axis is age, from age 22 to 65. And here is the percentage working, and this is by cohort. So this is the cohort born in 25, which I'm not going to spend much time because data start only when they are 34. This is the cohort of 35, which will be my first cohort that I'm going to focus on. 35 is the earlier cohort I'm going to focus on. And what you see that from the cohort born at 35, so basically people born around 35, we take 5 years total to get enough observations. And you see the cohort born in 45, it went up, and then it went up to 55, 65, and 75, and it seems that it is converging. And you have seen it also in the aggregate data, it seems to be converging. We are going to have only the 5 cohorts, 35, 45, 55, and 65 as our cohort for all our analysis. And most of our analysis will compare cohorts of married, non-married men and women 35 to 75. What you see here is that the employment rates of non-married, divorced and single, I already showed you that they look the same, really doesn't change over time. How comes? Why it's only the married? What is special about the married people? So only married female employment increased by cohort. And look about men. The men who are married, their employment rate has not changed at all over this year. The 25 cohort and the 85 cohort behave exactly the same. So what about the revolution? What about automation? What about all this stuff? How comes it affects only the female, the married female? Those who live with them, most of them sleeping in the same room. And what you see here is that there is almost no change also in the non-married men. The other aggregate phenomena, which is quite fantastic, that I think we are among the first to point out that jointly, is about wages. And what you see here is unconditional wages by married status. Married female and married men. So look at married men. First of all, married men earn always more than unmarried. And it is become even stronger since the early 90s. Look at this jump. Well, divorced men are older, they have more experience, they earn a little bit more than single men, but they are not doing as good as married men.
These are not per hour. These are earnings.
This is earning annual full-time.
They don't work as
It's
hard.
the same thing. It's a full-time. It's full-time equivalent. It's full-time equivalence. Okay?
Yeah.
And the growth rate, look at the growth rate. From 80 to 2014, 1.1, 1.8, and 0.9. So basically, another thing is going on here. But look at the female. The female married one were doing much worse than the single in the 60s, and now they are doing much better. Oh, those are different people. The growth rate of married female is 2%, much lower. In general, female growth rate is larger than male growth rate. So the gender difference is going down. So basically, there is something changed quite dramatically about who is married among female. And the way to do it in a simple descriptive way is to measure what is called in the literature, quote unquote, marriage premium. And what you run here is what a kind of a macro, not a labor economist, but a macro labor economist will run. Well, you will run a regression when you have a log wage, could be by hour or full time. We do the full time here. And then we write here experience, but you don't know experience from CPS. You just have age, so it's potential experience. And potential experience is not like real experience, especially for women. And we will talk a lot about this. Then you have the schooling level. We take 5 schooling levels. High school dropout is the default. High school graduate, some college is like technical college, community colleges, college graduate, and post-college. And we add a coefficient on correlation on marriage, the beta 7, and M is equal to 1 if you are married. And we run it for men and for women. Here and here in the graph, just the value of beta 7, which is the marriage premium in this simple regression. And what you find dramatically is that the marriage premium for men hasn't changed. You think it's all as if the same men are married. Remember, marriage rate went down from 80% to 63%. But what happened to the marriage premium? It was negative for the 35 cohort, and it became positive by 5% for the 75 cohort. What's the reason for that? Could we explain it? Selection into marriage have changed. Married women look like married men. That's what's going on. Or close to. Okay, so that's the motivation, why we need to go over all that carefully, of what's going on in the family. Who choose whom, how much to invest in education, depends on what partner you will get, whether to go to work, whether to have kids, and when. Okay? And there is a huge literature, I won't go over all of them. There are probably another 100 papers related to this I could cite. But I just want to point out that Chapery and this is basically we are using a family cooperative game like Chapery. Second, we are using like Chapery and all these others. Basically, we're taking Keane and warping career decision into a family decision. And I had some work with Osnat before on these issues. And Rubinstein and Mulligan emphasized the selection change. And Fernandez and Wong and Goena emphasized the divorce. And Golden and Katz, the contraception. And what about Jeremy and all the other papers who mentioned the issues of household technical change? And what about Jones and others who mentioned the gender gap and so forth? So anyone make the different issues, we put them all together. So what do we do? Or how we do it? So the following is the following. We are following tradition. We are kind of traditional conservative economists. So we are assuming that preferences haven't changed. Not only among cohort 35 to 75, I read the Bible, I see preferences haven't changed. And the same across the 5 cohorts. And how much of the change in the work and the wage and marriage and divorce, education and fertility across the 5 cohorts are due to the shift in what I said before, the 5 potential factors, which are used in the literature. So what are those? First of all, the change in the ability, in the distribution and the quality of your potential partners. You go to school also to meet your potential partner, but not in the school necessarily, but depends on whom you like to marry. So this is one, conditional, especially on education. The second most important, we think, is the divorce law. In the US, the divorce law have changed dramatically in the 70s. So it affected only certain cohorts in a different ways. And we are going to estimate it. We take it exogenously. Parents' education have changed. What can you do? If you go to school, it affects your kids. And the parents' education have changed, and we know how much, and we focus on one aspect of parents' education in the college rate among your mothers, whether your mother had a college or no. And that's actually, as shown before, is the most important to estimate. Then certainly the wage offer, both the wage function, so how much you will get the return for your experience, how much you will get the return for your education, what is the probability of getting a wage offer has changed, both for female and male, some from discrimination and some from technical change. So we take this as exogenous. And the last one is the birth control actually happened at the same time around when the divorce law have changed. And we will model it, and I will point out, but it's again exogenous, and we want to see how that affects. So those are the 5, and so should we need all of them, and how much each of them affect the decision, in what aspect? Okay, that's the paper. So it's a long journey, and actually it took us a long time to finish the paper, and luckily we got it published in a good place. So main result, we fit actually everything quite well. I will show you some of it because the point I want to emphasize, all the 5 factors have a significant contribution to the fit and have a story behind them. So it took us a while to understand the importance of each of them and to look on some alternatives. I cannot show everything. Family formation is essential to understand employment, wages, education, and fertility. That's, I think, the one thing I learned. Before, models usually have female decision model, male decision model. Now, I am sure that to understand employment, wages, education, and fertility on macro, on a micro level, you really have to take the endogeneity of the family decision. Who married whom, who leave whom, and how many kids they have to understand what would happen in the next 20 years of the labor market. Model account, so marriage premium that I showed you, actually we can explain well 90% of the marriage premium for female, and actually the reason for that, the reason for this marriage premium is not because employers give you wage because you are married. We assume employers give you nothing, employers don't, or you don't conditional on marriage. It's not in the wage function. It's all coming from correlation, which is biased by using the simple regression versus what is true, the true model where you have all the information. And the key, 34% of this stuff is coming from age is a terrible approximator for experience, especially for female, but also for male. And when you conditional on a true experience, you can explain 34% of this. And the other thing, which we have in the model, is unobserved skills. Unobserved skills are correlated with marriage, and you can imagine what. People, when they see each other, they learn about them also from things that we don't see, and they pick up the ones which are better. And the better high-skilled people are married now than before. And those who have a high, what we call unobserved good skills, which are good in the labor market, but they are also good in the marriage market. People who wake up in the morning, take care of the kids, take care of the partners, they also get high wage. So those who are doing well in the marriage market also do well in the labor market. And that's, I told you already, it's actually interesting. Shifting to a unmarried education, to single individual taxation, increase employment of married women by 9%, but it's also increased the marriage rate by 8%, which is quite interesting. And we were surprised. And labor supply elasticity are relatively high for married women, but that's usually people who are not full-time working all the time. then if you give them incentive to work more, they can work more, so their elasticity is higher. It's a common result. Actually, the labor supply elasticity of most others is very, very low because most others are working fairly high, as you have seen already. Now, I will do fairly quickly on the model, okay? So I will give you just a story, the story with equations. So I will tell the story and the slides will give you the equations, okay? What is the model? The model is a standard model of dynamic decision. You start your decision when you are 16 for age 17. F is for female, M is for male, and you choose schooling, employment. In employment, you could be full-time, part-time, or non-employed. Okay, unemployment and non-employment is the same. You can be married, or you can divorce. It's another decision, and then you could have kids. Either you are married or unmarried. Okay, so that's the decisions, and you can have one kid in a period. You start as a single at age 17, and you are in school. And school SC is equal 1. And if you are younger than 30, you can be in school. After age 30, you cannot be in school anymore. Actually, in the US, very few people are in school after age 30. And remember that PhD students is measure 0 in the population. So they take yourself too seriously. Employment is equal to 1. Hours could be full-time and half-time. Leisure is 1 minus H. Married is M equal 1. Fertility P equal 1. And you have a state space of giving you all the information for both men and female. First of all, married. So as you can see, the married couple, it's V with capital M. Depends on the information set of the male and the female. It's a weighted sum by lambda of the value of the female being married and the value of the male being married. And we take the weights as given. Previous research showed that estimating the weights is not such very important, and doing it, we didn't see that it's important. Now, net income. So net income is Y, and this is gross income minus taxes. And taxes depend on the income of the male, the income of the female. This is the wage of the male, the hours of the male, the wage of the female, the hours of the male, and the number of kids. And we take just the tax system from the US. We take the matrix and we put in the tax, and we assume perfect foresight on the tax for the entire lifetime. Quite an assumption, but very hard to do otherwise. The growth income is basically the income of both of them, and also benefit if they are unemployed. And we take the benefits from the data and from that, and it's include earned income tax credit, unemployment benefit, etc. And that's the key. So the key is really the tax system. And then consumption. So if you are married, you enjoy your partner consumption. So it's a great gain to be married in terms of utility. Suddenly, you enjoy your partner consumption, not only your consumption. And your total family consumption is 1 minus exogenous what you give to the kids. You don't enjoy your kids' consumption. Not a great assumption, but you enjoy other things about kids. Okay? Otherwise, we have to endogenize the consumption for the kids. That's complicated. So we allow kind of a fraction that goes to the kids. And the fraction is relatively depends on the number of kids, and certainly depends on your income. So this is your family income, as we mentioned before. Okay? And this is your family net income. Remember, this is the net income. And household consumption is a public good. So then, if you are a married person, so J could be either the female or the male, but capital M is married. And the utility, here is the utility. So let's go one by one. So the first aspect of the utility is utility for consumption. So it's a standard constant relative risk aversion. Then you have utility from leisure, your utility from your leisure. Then you have your utility from being married. I will point out this is you. Your utility from being married is the same. It's no J, meaning that it's the same for the female and the male. Then you have the utility from being pregnant, having kids. It's the same for the male and the female. No J aspect, if you are married. And you have what we call the last stuff is the utility, what we call the quality. So this is the quality of the kids. So it's the time the female put, the leisure time that the female put for the kids, the time that the husband put the household, for the kids and the household, the income of the family, and the number of kids. Okay, so this is sort of the quality stuff. And then each function is a complicated function. Oh, I didn't mention that. Then you have all the future. So the future is very important. Remember, you start off making decision on education before you earn anything. So you really need to know the future to make your decision on education. And then you have the leisure. So leisure depends on your leisure time, but also depends if you have a newborn. And that's actually a key aspect here, is the newborn. So the newborn, if you have a newborn, then there is a shock to the value of leisure, right? If you have a baby at home, you better stay at home and take care of it. Okay, so you really want to go to the leisure. And then as the baby gets older, the value of staying at home goes down. Okay, that's a very simple story. We modeled it in a way which make it easy. There are shocks of everything, as you can see. There are shock for this aspect. That's important. This is what is the value of marriage. The value of marriage depends on the assortative mating. This is the Becker idea of the difference of the education of the husband and the wife. So the baseline is that you have the same education level. And the education level is divided into all these 5 levels. 1 is high school dropout, 2 is high school graduate, 3 is some college, etc. And the point is whether your education, whether the education of the male is higher or lower than the female, okay? So the benchmark is that the same education level. So therefore D1 is positive, meaning that you prefer to have someone with the same education as you. Either you have a low education or a high education, okay? And then we will estimate D2, D3, and D4, and D2 and D3, whether the education of your husband is greater than yours if you are a female, etc., okay? And then the last stuff is we don't allow, actually it's complicated to model marriage if you allow people to pick up individuals from all different ages. It's complicated. So therefore, we actually model the quality of marriage at the health difference. And we have information on health. And we take health as a kind of a proxy for difference in age. Okay? And that's the way we do it. So we kind of simplify the model, and we allow for people prefer to marry people of the same health. Okay? So that's people that for David probably will look not for someone who is 80 years old. And okay? Is that clear? That's basically the story here. And health has actually only 3 levels: good, fair, and poor. And we use data from HRS on health of different cohorts. The value of getting pregnant is pi m, and pi depends on your health of the female, on the number of kids you have, of whether you were pregnant a year before, and on a shock, could be 0 or 1, plus a positive shock. You see, this is exponent of a shock, so it's positive shock. What is a positive shock? A positive shock is that you not necessarily really want a kid, but there is a shock you have a kid. Meaning, you enjoy doing something to get a kid. You guess what it is. And uncontrolled pregnancy means that this additional shock is a positive shock, which is big and you have no control. And if you have a control, meaning you take something to prevent to have a kid and still enjoy, then the mean of this error is very close to 0. So the technology, the measure of technology is really by the mean of this positive shock. That's what is called birth control. I don't know if anyone modeled this before, but this is one of our innovation of how to model exogenously the impact of birth control on getting pregnant. Okay? That's basically the way we do it. We estimate these parameters separately for the different cohorts, and surprisingly, we got the mean exactly on the direction that you expect, meaning higher shock to the 35 cohort, a little bit lower shock for the 45 cohort, and almost zero shock like this for the cohorts after that. Is that clear? That's basically the way to do the...
So in the model, pregnancy is a decision.
Pregnancy is the decision.
So P is a decision, pi is the utility.
And pi is the shock, is that, and the way we model this, the fifth exogenous change into the theory. And the last is the quality.
So just to clarify, what changes across the cohorts is the variance of those shocks?
The mean of the shock. The variance we kept constant. It's really how big is the impact on you. You can do the variance, and since it's a log normal,
Right.
shifting the variance of shifting the mean is the same. So we just did the
the
mean.
estimates would come from some sort of auxiliary
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. It will do the same. So we value function of single. So what's the difference between a single and a married? Sorry for this shift there. A single can go to school. If you are married or if you are working, you leave school. So you first go to school until you are married, and you go to work, and then you leave school. We don't allow people to really be in school while they are in study. Okay? It's to simplify the model. And that's the value of for the female of being in school, and this is the value of the male of being in school. And then the value of the utility of being in school depends on a cost if you are going to college. So TC is the cost of going to college. And it depends on how much you love school, depends on your PE, which is your parents' education. Basically, whether your mother has a college degree or not. That's how much you like school, just from the preferences. And then there is also what we call a shock, and that is basically the skill endowment. So how much you like school depends on your quality, meaning your cognitive ability. Okay? And it's random. Each person gets his cognitive ability, which we don't observe, but he observes, and it affects his preferences. So if you like to be in school, those are who like to be in school, they are in school. And income is exactly the same as I did before for the single, for the married. So that's basically the difference between single and married, is the schooling stuff. And the labor market is very simple wage equation, so it's the same wage equation. The only difference is that we do here than what has been done before is that we lack experience. So X is actual work experience, but the coefficient of work experience depends on your education. So the experience impact on your wage would be different by the education level, the 5 education level. And it has the square. And then the constant here is basically the shift of education return. Okay? So that's the labor market. The other thing is the error term. And the error term has the two parts. It has a standard error, but it also has the skill aspect. So if your mother has a college degree, the probability that you have high cognitive ability is higher. Because she took care of you, she read your books more than when you were a kid. Okay, that's the story. And that's we allow for that. We don't observe it. So this is a permanent transitory element, and this is the skill endowment. So this is important. So the skill endowment comes on your preferences to go to school, but also affect your wage. And there is a job offer probability, which is just some types of a logit function that depends on your education, on your true experience, and on your health. So if you are not healthy, it most likely will not get a job offer, or less probability that you get a job offer. Marriage market. The marriage market is a very simple. Marriage offer is a product of two probabilities. Is a probability. So first of all, you basically meet people randomly, let's say in the bar or in school, and it's a function of age and whether you are in school. So it may change over time, but potential partners depends on their education. So if you have a high school or you are dropout, it's more likely you will meet high school and dropout because you will go to a bar of high school and dropouts. And if you have some college, you will most likely meet people some college. You go to community colleges. And if you have a college degree, most likely you will also meet some PhDs because you are in the college area, okay? So that's the multinomial logic function. So each period, you are sampling a potential partner if you are single. You don't sample when you are married, okay? So there is a limit to how much you can do, how much we allow you to do. And once you sample a partner, suppose you are a female and you sample a person that you consider to marry, and he consider you to marry, then you ask his CV. You ask his CV, you ask his education, you ask his health, his experience, how many kids he have, what is your mother education, how much he worked last period, what is his unobserved skills, etc. And the men do the same. So they have full information about the partners. They think they have. We assume they do have it. So they go back to the book and they calculate the value of being single. The female goes and she goes and maximizes what would be if she would stay single. But what would be if she would marry to this guy? And once she gets the utility of married to this guy, because she knows to do all this complicated calculation, if she is doing better than staying single, and he is seeing being married to this woman if being single, then the marriage is formed. Okay? And there are no transfers and all these other games that theorists like to do. We take it very simple. We choose the one that maximizes the weighted value, and divorce is okay. So every period you are married, you could divorce. And how you divorce? You calculate every period when you are married, what is the utility that I have if I stay married, versus what is the utility if I am single, minus the cost of divorce. So I divorce if the utility of staying single is better than married. It's actually, I think it's the sign here is opposite. Well, I haven't read that. Okay? So anyway, you get a value of being divorced is higher. Okay?
Shouldn't this be what changes over time? Mutual consent versus unilateral?
This is, each person does it. It's enough that one of them decide to divorce, then they divorce.
So the way you change the model for changing the divorce laws over the time is...
Yeah, so the divorce law change is exactly. The divorce law change, the coefficients on cost of divorce changes. And we allow that to be different between female and male. And the cost is different between female and male. And as you know, the change in law basically make it less costly for female. And we are going to estimate it by the different cohorts. So the estimate of these alphas, 4 and 5, is really going to give the value or the cost of divorce that changes over cohorts, okay? So that's basically the whole model. It's quite a big model.
What they do with the kids in divorce?
The kids are going to the female, but the husband has to spend the, okay? We're assuming the kids going to the female, and but then the husband pays, and that's part of the. Okay, estimation. So it's a dynamic program. It's solved recursively from age 65 to 17 with a terminal value. So at 65, you have your state space and you know your value of staying alive at that time. No death up to 65, and we ignore death. Okay, so life is safe. There is some death, but we don't take it in consideration. Estimation is by GMM. We have a whole section of identification. It's actually interesting that to identify this model, remember we have 5 exogenous we have a lot of exogenous variables going on. And basically, the consideration is very similar to Heckman's 74 paper. He got already the Nobel for that, so we can rely. But it's very similar identification discussion based on the variation in wages, in health, in taxes, in benefits, and in age. Basically, let's identify the model carefully. We use repeated cross-section, therefore it's very similar to Heckman, who actually doesn't think about or doesn't talk about panel data for identification. We also estimate mainly for, most of the model is estimated originally on the 45, 55, 65 cohort, and the 35 and the 75 we leave relatively untargeted, and most of our discussion would be about how much we can explain the 35 versus 75. So we estimate the model for unified sample of the 3 cohort. We keep all preferences parameter as estimated for the unified model. So we keep preferences for the 35 and 75 based on the estimate of the preferences here. We estimate the exogenous processes then separately for each cohort. We do it jointly conditional on the preferences parameters so we can control for selection. So we correct for selection on each of the wage function, etc., etc. We have a lot of moments. We have so many moments for all the cohort. You know, the difference in moments is because we are only in 2015 and some cohorts are still in the labor market, so we don't see all of them. So we have a lot of moments. More moments for the 55 and the 45 cohort, less moments for the 35 and the 75 cohort. So we do fairly well. The model fit, the benchmark worker estimated for all this cohort. Remember that actually the college rate for the 35 cohort, only 6% of the mothers had college degree. The 75 cohort, 27% has college degree, and this is still growing. So things are still moving. And really, we don't close the model, but it's kind of interesting. The model by cohort as estimated in the benchmark, but the 4 exogenous processes are per cohort, as I say. And the marriage market, we are actually allow for the parameters of the matching function and divorce to change by gender and number of children, as I said already, and the labor market, wage offer, and job market probabilities. Then we have the brace control for each cohort. So what is the model fit? I cannot show you how I'm doing. I have about 15
more minutes.
Okay, so 15 more minutes. I will be quick. I just want to show you employment wage and married, unmarried fit. If you go to the slides, you can see, and in the paper, you can see that we fit everything. I just want to show you what do we mean by fit. What we do by fit, I mean, far away, you see that red lines and blue lines are the same. The red is the fitted, the blue is the model. And what we go here is married woman, in different cohorts. So this is the different cohorts. Then we go by ages. So we just group them 25 to 34, 35 to 44, etc. Okay? And you can see that we're doing fairly, we fit the employment of married, non-married. Employment is mainly affected by. What is really important is that the skill bias technical change is increase the return to education, and therefore we can fit it. Without allowing for that, we cannot really fit. The other thing I want to emphasize is the wage parameters. And just to point out that we assume that each cohort faces a different wage function. And what we see is quite dramatic difference between the 35 and the 75 cohorts. And what I want to point out that if you look at the parameters on the education and experience, female in the 75 cohorts look very much like male. Male are still getting higher for any of their characteristics. So if you look for experience, male with high education get 9% versus 8% for female. College, 8% versus 9, but not that much different again. But if you compare it to what has happened in 35, it was 3% versus 6%. And if you look at the return to education, it was 10, the return to education, to move it to what you use, you have to look at the difference between the parameters. The difference between the parameters give you the rate of return for moving from from college graduate to post-college, etc. But you can see that this is 10.07, this is in the log, versus 0.13, and here it's 0.41, so the difference so female labor market opportunities in the wage are much, much closer to what that has been, and there is a skill bias technical change for both cohorts. So if you go on unmarried and married, we fit perfectly. And basically what it means that if you look at the wages and the employment that we fit well, that means that the aggregate data we fit well. Because if we fit well for all these cohorts, then we fit well for the aggregate data. And that's the most important. So the model replicates the aggregate data that I showed you at the beginning. Okay? Both the employment and the wage aggregate data. That's the key point of fitting, and I think it's important because I don't know of any other paper who could actually fit all of this and can explain how you fit it. So let's go further. All exogenous changes by cohort were needed. So actually, we can show you that if we just don't allow for one of the exogenous changes, meaning if I don't allow for the divorce cost to change, or I don't allow for the control of the change in contraception, there is aspect of the data that don't fit, and intuitively I can tell the story what it is. Okay? I just don't have the time to do that. The marriage premium. So I think the key to tell about the marriage premium. So what we do in the model is we are estimating the model without having marriage as a premium directly to wages, if you recall. So we want to see the following. Suppose now we have the model. We simulate the data on the model. So we have the wages of all the people, and then by each cohort, and then we can take from the simulated data and run the stupid macro style wage regression. You can drop the word stupid if you wish. But running the simple regression and introduce the marriage insight. So how much the marriage enter as a positive aspect into the men who are married. And what we find is that in the data, it's around 18 to 20%, and in the model, it's 13 to 14%. So one aspect we figure is the same across all the cohorts. However, we are only explaining 75%. So there is probably something different about married men behavior that the model does not capture in the impact on the wage. The women, we actually almost the same. Minus 9, minus 8, plus 4, plus 5, plus 4. So among the female, we are explaining almost 90% of this. So where it's coming from? Where is this correlation between wage and marriage among female and male coming from? And I will concentrate about the female. This is a paper mainly about female behavior and the importance of female into the marriage market. And the key point is basically the difference between the return to experience that we estimate. How we identify experience? We control experience in the model. We identify experience because we have age. And there is a model mapping from experience to age. And from there we estimate the impact. And what we have, and you can see if you take the OLS regression, the return, let's look, high school graduate, 75, the return to, this is among women, the return to age is 0.02, the return to experience is 0.06. So it's a huge difference. 6% return every year is huge. Look at the same thing is about, etc. And it's true all over. The return for the 35 cohort is 0, etc. So the key is really the difference. So if you just look for control for experience, the premium is like this. But once you control for the other aspect that we have in the model, is the unobserved skills. But if you control for the unobserved skills and you run the regression, you get no premium for the marriage. Okay, so basically if you control correct for experience or for unobserved skills among the married female, which basically say that married female in the 35 cohort, when they married, it was not that important their unobserved labor market skills, and it was not that important the experience because they didn't go to. And if you look for the current female, it's completely different. The married female are important aspect of the labor market. So that's basically the storage of the marriage premium. So let me go for we have the same story about men. I will start. The impact of changes. So what we do here, I cannot have time to do all of this. I would just tell you. What we do here, we compare the outcome between the 35 cohort to the 75 cohort, and we ask, what is the contribution of each of our exogenous variables? How much mother education affect all the changes? How much marriage market affect all the changes? How much labor and marriage market affect all the changes? How much pregnancy shock affect all the changes? Okay? And we have an accounting measure. And each of them is quite important. I don't have the time. I would just give you mother education. For example, explain 55% of the decrease in the marriage rate, 20% of the decrease in the married female fertility, just the mother education. Okay? 12% of the increase in married women wages versus 6% for unmarried, etc., etc. So a lot has to do with the selection and the impact of that. How the mother education affect? It affects your unobserved skills. It affects you how much you like school. And through that, it affects all your lifetime. And I have to skip. I would just say that what account for the change in the married woman wages? And as we explained, most of this is the labor market. So here is the wage increase. I focus about the wage increase. And the wage increase from a marriage premium of -8 to +4, 22% coming from the changes in the potential husband you are going to meet. And because you want to meet a potential husband with higher education, you invest in more education, etc. But 52% is coming from the changes in the labor market, from the income return for high education, and 20% coming from the ability that you can control your number of children over your lifetime. In fact, 80% of the reduction in unmarried female children coming just from the ability to do the contraception. And the last thing I want to emphasize is that we do the simulation, we do the policy analysis, we find a huge, the immediate impact is 8%, but then if you correct for the fact that actually more female are working and the income, actually the tax income increase, we can actually decrease the tax rate. The impact of the moving from a joint taxation to a single taxation is such that we basically can decrease the tax rate, and in this way making 9% more married female to work and 8% more people to get married quite significantly. And that's because the elasticities of married female for employment is huge. It's 1.8 to 1.06 for this is all about the cohort of 65, and that's basically the punchline of the paper. So anyway, I told you everything I can tell you about marriage. Household formation is essential for understanding labor supply education. Higher women of recent cohort have much higher observed and unobserved skills. The marriage matching selection is an important factor. And there is a lot more can be done with this model. And we are going to continue until we find more result. And thank you very much for listening. I can take a few.
We have 5 minutes for questions.
And the first question, you talked about mother's effects on children. And what about father effects? Are they equal?
No, actually, most studies, we find out that once you control for the mother education, the marginal impact of the father is almost zero. And I think the reason is that actually most, in fact, the education level and other characteristics of the husband are so highly correlated because of assortative mating. And
So sometimes you have a family when father is a prominent professor or owner of the company and mother has no university education, and usually their children.
this is just an empirical result, that once you control for the mother education, if you add the father, it doesn't help in estimation, and therefore.
And one small question. You are experienced man, and I would like to ask you. Should we influence on our children's choice about career, about education, and about marriage, or we shouldn't show our opinion?
The way the model is set is that the fathers and the mothers say nothing to the kids. The kids make their own decisions. The only thing they affected their kids is their unobservability when they are children. And I think this is consistent with a lot of research in economics. The most important impact of the parents is how they raise their kids and how much they take care of them in early childhood. And that, in fact, in the earlier paper, and one of the studies that we are going to do is to study how much the characteristic at age 17 is correlated with your future. The previous studies found that among men, 90% of the variance in the future is explained by the variance at age 17. For female is about 60%. And we are going to do this research. This is another topic that we are going to look. So take care of your kids when they are at home, and then let them do whatever they want to do. That's my personal advice.
I have a couple of questions. So one is, why does ring matter?
Why?
Ring matter in the sense of marriage versus cohabitation, given that in the US especially.
No, it's a very good question. First of all, the data on cohabitation start only at 2002. There are some studies talking about that. And we ignore that because it's very small in the US. In Europe, it's much bigger. It's growing, but it's very small yet, and therefore we took cohabitation part of single, and we don't think it affects our result. Our result for the cohort born in 35 to 75. If we are going to look for the future, and especially if you want to make a prediction of what happened to the cohort born in 1990, my youngest kid, you should probably take it more seriously. And the point is not, I mean, the marriage is just an indication that you live together, but you live together foreseeing that you will continue to live together a long time, and the cost of separation is relatively high. And that's, I think, is the key point. So I don't think it's not the issue of cohabitation. It's certainly living together and staying. So it's the ring is just because in the data it says you have a ring, and that's easy to identify the data.
And the second very good question was, I want to look it through the lens of technological progress in the household goods, like Jeremy's story. So how much of that changes, exogenous changes?
So we have a whole page devoted for this issue, because we think that the work of Jeremy and his co-authors on this issue is extremely important. And our point is that most of the changes in household has happened in the 50s and the 60s, and it affected mainly the cohort before 35 in their lifetime. So therefore, and if you look at Jeremy and other papers, they use aggregate data, and they focus on the changes at that time. They don't go by cohort. But if you go by cohort, the cohort of 25 and before that were affected. And in fact, we show that to really explain an aspect of fertility and employment, if you just use changes in the household production function, it doesn't work well with our fit for the 35 cohort. And we really need the contraception as a major impact on the fertility rather than how many diapers you have and so forth. And actually, it's a kind of an important issue, but we write down in the paper exactly the words I just said. The German and other are really related to earlier cohorts, mainly behavior. That's our main point. So we don't think it was not important, but it was important earlier cohorts than these cohorts. Yes?
Hi, my name is Olga, and I'm both a financial consultant and a data architect. And as a data architect, I cannot help noticing that cohorts from 1935 through 1975 should be retiring in droves right now, or maybe some of them very much dead. So how much your logic and your model applies to the modern population of the United States, which actually changed quite drastically?
No, very good question. In terms of what we have focused,
Yes.
the 75 cohort is almost the same as the 85 cohort. So the 75 cohort, I mean, people born in 75 is the cohort of almost of my daughter. She bore the oldest daughter. She bought in. You see, you cannot estimate if you don't have enough data. People who were born in 75 in 2015, they are only 40 years old, and that's as much as we can learn about them. But if we look at their behavior and you look at the 85 cohort or the 90 cohort in terms of labor market outcomes and number of kids and marriage rate is very much the same. Now, I'm not saying, people take me about the Y generation, the X generation, the iPhone generation, and so forth. I'm not saying there are no changes. In terms of the variable we looked, it seemed to be converges and really the key changes, and it's actually interesting. But your point is actually very important, because I think one of our contribution is that in order to understand aggregate data, you have to go to data by cohort.
Right.
That's basically one of our messages.
Right, which means if you include Hispanics and other, generation of color and the millennials, and never heard to notice that 1975 is the least numerous generation in the United States, which is Generation Y. I still live in the United States for the past 20 years, I know.
It's okay, Olga.
So basically everything changed. Even the marriage premium turned into marriage penalty, as you know, by the tax law.
It's
so
true.
If you add everything in the data model, that will actually look much
I can tell you that you are at least 80% right. I live 20%. We are working now on the Hispanic and the blacks. It's a different story. They are 30% of the population, and it's a different story, and we have to work and understand it well. And I do agree with you that my daughter, who was born 78, and tell me that she's completely different than my kid who was born 1990. So I would say we still argue about it, but 80% you may be right. But the message of this paper in terms for research is think cohort-wise. Don't just look aggregate data, because aggregate data is a mixture of cohorts who face different opportunities, different labor market, and therefore different decision process.
Thank you. Very much looking forward to your updated model.